All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Really, really excited to have the two panelists with me to really dive a little bit deeper into transactional selling versus consultative selling. I think in this day and age, it's no longer simply just about buying products. We're really, buyers are out there really looking for solutions that are going to address their unique individual needs and challenges. And it's up to us as sellers, whether we're in net new business, whether we're in post sales, to really be able to connect with our customers and be able to offer that consultative approach. And I really think it's going to separate a lot of companies in the future, and we're going to see better results as it relates to NRR and just net new business that's coming in when we put the right effort up front to sell to the right customer for the right reasons. So today I'm joined with Madeline and Dan. My name is Justin Chappelle. I'm actually work for a company called Growth Molecules, and we do basically software consulting around CSP, customer success platforms. But we also offer, maturity models and assessments to help customers really streamline their business processes. So Madeline, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Justin. Great to be here today. I'm Madeline Dupre, a Global VP of Customer Success at AirCall. AirCall is a cloud-based phone system that empowers the modern business with ways to communicate with your customers. And so we sell into sales and support teams, and we integrate across your entire tech stack. I've got a global team all across the world, and I sit in New York, and I'm really excited. This is a topic I'm super passionate about.
Amazing. My name is Dan Ennis, and I'm a director of customer success at a company called Workato. Workato is a leading iPaaS platform that helps companies with their enterprise automation needs and moving into a more agentic future for their work. I'm very excited to talk about this topic. I'm based in the Bay Area, and the scale customer success function that I lead at Workato is truly a global role as well, similar to what Madeline mentioned, people all around the globe on my team, and excited to dive in today.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to have, both coasts represented here, right? We got East Coast, West Coast. It's like the old rap battle days. We're gonna see who comes out on top here. But I really wanted to start with, really taking a look at some of the strategies that we may need to introduce, especially as leaders. When I think about, changing and shifting the mindset of the field teams, they already have processes. There's already, they're already successful in the way that they've been selling. What are some of the things that we as leaders should be thinking about from a strategy perspective to really prepare and transition to make our field teams, whether they're sales or customer success managers, what's the strategy that you use to really prepare them to change from this transactional type selling model to more of that consultative approach? Madeline, do you want to maybe take us to start?
Absolutely. Thanks, Justin. I think the word that comes to mind for me is trust. Today, customers have such an abundance of choice. They not only have a lot of choices, there's a lot of different products on the market, they also can change their mind pretty quickly and roll out a new cloud-based solution pretty quickly, right? And so being able to really lean into treating your prospects, treating your existing customers as partners by establishing trust with them is really kind of the starting point, in my opinion. And in terms of establishing trust, I think especially in this sort of AI-driven world where we tend to kind of be overwhelmed by robots and repetitive nature, and I get a LinkedIn message from a BDR and I don't know if it's an AI BDR, right? I think being able to really differentiate yourself by personalization and then also active listening is going to be that immediate pillar to establish that trust. And then from there, kind of just establishing consistency in communication and really being transparent about what you're offering helps you build that partnership with your customers and your prospects in order to kind of open the conversation and allow them to really understand that they can trust you, that you're going to give them a solution and not just a feature. So I'd start with trust, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was just saying, you say something there that it kind of makes me think real quick. So active listening, right? When I think about the difference between that transactional selling of a product, right? Here's what our product does. It's going to do this for you. And then we just kind of move on. Instead of sitting down and asking the right questions and listening to the customer to understand, like, what are those true pain points that they're going through, and then like, how does my solution help alleviate that pain and make it stress-free for them? And you may actually, if you do that properly, identify other opportunities within that same deal, because you're starting to understand that customer's business more holistically, that it may not just be what you're offering today, it could be things that you're offering in the future as well. Dan, I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well, in terms of like strategies to prepare, our field teams.
Yeah, I think that building on what you said there with active listening, it's funny you mentioned the business understanding, because I would say that I would agree with Madeline that it's trust, but specifically the trust that you understand their business, that you understand their need, that you understand what their pains are, so that you're truly recommending a solution, whether you're on the pre-sales for an initial sale, or you're on the customer success side where they've already begun to establish a relationship with your business. They need to understand that, or to believe that you truly understand their business and what it is that their challenges and goals are, so that they can believe that you really are able to make the right recommendations for them. Because if they don't think you understand their business, they're not going to have that trust with you. And so that would be, I think, a less of a difference in strategy, and more what I would say is like a first step in actually building that trust, is making sure to understand their business, whether that's in the active listening with an individual, spending time to actually research and really research, not a quick Google search, but research and understand what goes on in their industry and in their business, so that you can really demonstrate how your product really meets a deep felt need for their business.
So if I think about that, right, it sounds simple, right? Like, oh yeah, we just need to listen to our customers. We need to ask better probing questions. We need to, build a partnership of trust and let them know that we're here to help solve those problems for them. What are the challenge? Why is it so challenging then? So what are some of the challenges you think we face, or those are listening? What do you think they're facing when they go, I want to do that, but I can't, because like, what do you think are those challenges that we have to overcome as leaders?
Justin, I think there's.
Oh,
So I'll jump in and then I'll pass back to you, Dan. I think as the first very important thing is to make sure that you're empowering and enabling your reps, right? And your reps meaning your CSMs, your AEs, even your BDRs, your SDRs, everyone who's going to interact with the customer. And I think we use words like trust and empowering, and they can sound kind of fluffy. But if we actually want to get concrete in terms of what that means, a couple of things come to mind. So to Dan's point, empowering your team to understand different industry verticals, to understand how the product translates to the persona they're talking to, right? And this can be super, super specific and scalable. So let's say, at AirCall, we often sell into support teams. And so empowering our individuals who speak with support leaders to, one, have a real kind of persona map of what are a support team members' KPIs, what are their pain points, what maybe do they do today that's manual that AirCall would solve for them, or AirCall would reduce those manual actions. So both kind of understanding the person, maybe understanding the industry vertical, and then tying it to your solutions is so critical. Because I think often what we see is we can talk hypothetically and we can think about, okay, well, you must want our solution because there's other solutions that do it, right? But no. It's actually, how does the solution actually tie to the needs and the pain points of that individual? And doing very concrete role playing and storytelling and point of contact kind of mapping within your team to enable them is really that critical first step. So sorry, Dana, you go ahead and add on to that since I cut you off.
All good. We're similar. We're sharing a brain today, I think. So on that front, when it comes to empowering, it's empowering, I would also say specifically with having a really clear definition of the outcomes your product actually achieves and what your ideal customer profile looks at like. And I think that that's really easy to say, but a lot harder to do in practice, because it means saying no to potential bad fits up front to get real deep impact and be a consultative influence down the line. And if you're not empowering your reps to say no to deals, whether that's on the customer success side or the sales side, because they might not be a great fit, all the rest goes out the window because they're going to just be trying to close whatever they can close. And so as a leader, we owe creating the framework that allows them to want to do and to be incentivized to actually do that deep discovery, right? Because the incentives will help shape the behavior. So I would say as leaders, we owe a really clear definition of what that looks like so that they know what to listen for, so that they can really truly believe and understand that the certain pains that organizations feel are what our product can solve.
So Dan, let me ask you this question, Dan, because I think, in your experiences, and we've known each other for a while, I think, working in a scaled model, that you bring up ICP, right? That ideal customer profile. And sometimes, we know that we will sell, right? It's sell at all cost. It's about profit, not profitable growth, just growth. We want profitable growth. So sometimes that means we sell to maybe somebody that's not within our ICP. Is there anything that you've done, or how do you get, as a leader, like how do you empower your people? And then where do you take that information back to? Because they still have to internally work. So you want to make sure you're not creating internal friction. Do you have any best practices, or how have you done that in the past to really take that empowerment you've given your team to then be able to go and action it, to tell marketing or sales, like, we're selling non-tech fits. What's going on? Like, how do you work that into your day-to-day and making sure that you are empowering your team, but at the same time keeping that internal relationship working well?
Yeah, absolutely. So number one is I'll start with the second part on the internal piece. It's everything is for one team, one success. We win as a company. I think, and encouraging that constantly with my team, so that anything that we're sharing is because it's not just one team blaming another. Because I've shared with my teams before, if that's what we're doing, I have no interest in that. That's not at all what we're trying to do. But if it's trying to share feedback, because long term, a sales team that wants to see growth, especially because there's sales teams that care about growing existing accounts, like an account management function, they care about making sure we've got an ICP, because they're never going to be able to grow a poor fit customer who we're always fighting tooth and nail to barely keep and hold on to. And their energy is going to be spent on that when they would rather as well be spending that energy. So from an internal perspective, it's ensuring that whatever processes we take for giving that feedback are from the perspective of we win together. As a company, as an org, we all want to see that, and that has to start at the leadership level with building those relationships and building that trust on a really human level before processes can ever come into the picture. And then as far as empowering the team on an actual realistic level, we do things like having a series of questions that they can ask whoever they're working with to understand if it's not a good fit for the person they are currently working with at the org. Are there ways to identify if there's other potential fits within the org because they already have a subscription, if that's a reasonable component? We've got a lot of things we do to exhaust, because we also don't want to do the other thing that I'll own this, because we're all CS professionals here, customer success professionals. Throw your hands up too early and say that the first hard customer you're dealing with isn't an ideal customer profile. That's really easy to do, and really, honestly, shifts the blame off of yourself and off of your team. So we've got a really long list that we pursue first before we say that. But then part of being customer centric and being a good consultative professional means owning and saying, yeah, this might not be a good fit, and being honest with the customer about that and empowering the team. Yes, they've gone through their matrix of what it is that they're doing to ensure that that actually is the case. I've approved it. They've run it by me. And then we are able to share that. And then that, to Madeline's earlier point, builds trust. If a customer understands that you're not trying to just claw tooth and nail for every cent from them, they leave with a more positive impression down the line, as well as just the culture that creates of keeping the customers first.
Yeah, I'll just chime in on and add to that, Dan. I think what is so critical, and I keep learning throughout my career, is the power of shared KPIs. And so for me, I report into a chief sales officer who has both net new sales and net retention. And so I've learned a lot from him on the need to constantly balance both, right? And he has to show up and report to the board on both, what do we bring in from a net new sales perspective, and also what's the impact on the net retention side. And I think that his sort of ability to create this alignment and also be kind of honest about where the friction can be has been empowering to me to be a better customer success leader and understand when to not just push back necessarily, but when to actually tell the story of successful customers and maybe move the needle and differentiate a little bit on where we can win a little bit outside of our ICP, but also at the same time be very transparent about where there's risk. And as a leader, sometimes that does mean getting in front of the board and saying, we have X% of revenue above our ICP, and I see risk here because of Y, right? And being very diligent and data driven around what that risk is, and maybe then bringing it back to the business to say, we could develop here to save a couple accounts up market, or we could dive deeper here, which could much more align with our ICP, and then sharing the KPIs by coming to an agreement across the board. And I want to add too, shared KPIs are not just CS and sales; they're also with product. And so talk about the power of consultative selling. How are you as a sales leader, as a customer success leader, as a support leader, how are you bringing feedback back to the product? And how are you saying, hey, if we move the needle a little bit here, I think we can actually improve our win rates, or we actually can mitigate risk by developing this product or feature. And then we all as a team share that KPI. And then we're much more consultative on both the go-to-market side, but also on the product side in terms of how we're thinking about that impact for the customers. And then that's just contagious across the business.
Yeah. That's I think you guys both make some great points there. And I do want to go back to something that was brought up. And I think Madeline, you mentioned it about understanding the vertical and storytelling, right? So I think we've all agreed that consultative selling is much more advantageous and better for the customer's experience, right? That buyer experience. When I think about understanding the vertical, when you have that multi-product, multiple vertical kind of business, it can get diluted and it can get watered down a little bit because that domain expertise may not sit across all of your verticals. You might have skilled individuals. What are your thoughts, and what does the future look like then as it relates to whether it's in the sales organization or in the post-sales organization, of more of that specialization in roles to drive better conversations within a vertical? I know in previously at an organization I worked at, we sold into healthcare, and then we sold into manufacturing, and we sold into education. But our core business was healthcare, so it was healthcare and then everything else. But when the persona or the skill of our AEs and our CSMs that were in our healthcare vertical were ex-healthcare professionals, because they needed to be able to speak the talk the talk, walk the walk, speak the language of their customer. Do you see that as something that, as leaders, we may start thinking about differently in the future? I'd love to get your guys' thoughts of, like, today, I think we've all hired jack of all trades. AI is going to take away the ability, help with some of that. But like, what do you see as the AE of the future, the BDR of the future, the CSM of the future? Is it going to become more domain specialization, or are we always going to be hiring these jack of all trades?
So I can jump in there. I prior to my time at Aircall, which is industry agnostic, so we serve many different types of industries. I was in hotel technology for 6-7 years, and so we exclusively sold to hotels, and we hired a lot of ex-hoteliers to build that trust with our customer base. Mm-hmm. And so I see the pros and cons on both sides. I think when I started at Aircall, I was quite shocked that we didn't spend enough time understanding what our customers do. And I think that it really depends on your business model, who and how you need to staff in terms of expertise. We will continue to be industry agnostic, but we sell into sales and support team use cases across many different industry verticals. And so there's a couple things that we've done here at Aircall in order to empower our team to understand, what are the KPIs of a sales leader, no matter what business they're in, but also to have some kind of scalable tools for knowing how to speak to a manufacturing company versus how to speak to like a clinic, like a healthcare clinic. And so we instead of maybe differentiating the team and say you're going to go focus on just health, you're going to go focus just on manufacturing, because that might not be scalable based on our model. We've created some repeatable motions to coming back to kind of enabling the team to know how to ask questions, or how to, maybe if you get an answer, then tell a story about another customer that's going to make them feel heard and them have that trust that you understand their vertical. So I think there's absolutely scalable ways to do that without having to have just an army of industry experts. But Dan, I'd love your thoughts on this.
Very similar approach on our end, both in my current role at Workato and previously at Monday.com, in the sense that both were very industry agnostic as well. So similar to what you're describing there, Madeline. And it's a combination of leveling up and providing that enablement for the teams around some of the core roles that we sell into, even if the industries are different for the different businesses, similar roles. Maybe the head of IT for a company like Workato, right, with our integration platform. So even though the companies themselves are very different, so wanted to make sure we share that level of enablement and education. But we also have a few specialists for certain key industries. So rather than assign accounts by that, we're able to have a few people who we know internally that we have intentionally brought on, who specialize in certain industries from that domain background for when you do need that higher level of consultative for that. And we can bring that in. And it's not every case that needs that, because to Madeline's point, you don't need to do that in every instance, because they don't expect you to know everything inside and out, enough to know that you can truly understand what they're going through, but they don't expect you to be an expert in their business necessarily. And so getting that right level of enablement, and then just from a pragmatic perspective, Madeline mentioned the customer stories, having that library that you train your teams on and make it really easy to find customer stories, because your team's not going to have a personal story on every customer type in every industry. So making that really referenceable for your teams is massive. So that way they know what to listen for and when to bring in another customer story on that front.
Yeah.
I would just, sorry, Justin, I'll just add, if you don't mind. I think that this is a great example of what a powerful way to use AI, right? So if your CSMs or your AEs are preparing for a call with an industry they don't know a ton about, maybe they drop their kind of standard discoveries into GPT and they say, how would I frame this in a way that's going to excite a leader in X industry? And just see what it comes back with, right? See, it could be good or bad, but what a great way to kind of leverage the power of automation and AI to actually create more personalization, even if you are not hiring a team of industry experts. So just something that I'd play with there too.
I tell the team that all the time to ensure that they're using that before calls to level up on some of the industry stuff that they don't know. What is this person likely facing? What are their KPIs? What are they measured on? It's not going to be a complete replacement for that industry knowledge and the need for it in certain key cases, but it will absolutely allow you to raise the floor of what your teams can accomplish.
Yeah. We have to be able to use the tools that are given to us to empower our teams to become more educated, right? So I think we all agree that there's definitely some really good use cases for AI in that area as well. I'd love to kind of go back to KPIs. I think, Madeline, you brought it up. Dan, you kind of mentioned it within some of the conversation already as well. But when I think about this new approach to selling, if it's more consultative, sales cycles could potentially be longer. We may see that the number of touches needed or interactions needed to close a deal may change. And when I think about some of the more traditional KPIs that we hold our teams accountable to, they're usually more around the financial success of the interaction or of the engagement of the transaction, but they don't really sometimes track the customer health or the retention effort or the relationship that was built over the lifetime of that customer. I would be interested if you guys have any experience or figured out, like, what are some of those KPIs that reflect better on the overall health of an engagement with a customer that really focuses more around I understand my customer needs. They trust they trust what I've sold them, and it's not that traditional NRR, GRR type number. What are you seeing as kind of like those non-traditional metrics or KPIs when we think about consultative selling that may be a way for us to measure the effect or the effort that's being put in upfront to really close these deals?
I can jump in on this one. It is a secondary KPI, of course, but I've seen some of our sales teams have a component where we track the first value of our customers, right? How long did they got the first value? Did they go through all of that and implement and get set up and running? And we do track. It's not necessarily a direct KPI, but it is used for coaching for the sales teams. If there are customers that they are signing that are taking significantly longer and are never hitting consumption thresholds. So looking at some of those leading indicators, because yes, retention matters, but retention at that point is such a lagging indicator. It's the ultimate one, yes, but it's so lagging. You want to catch what are the things you're looking at as the leading indicators to retention, with the earliest being that first value. Are they obtaining it quickly? And then you can even do things like, it's not necessarily a KPI, but it's a forcing function for the sales teams with what you ask them to include before they can close an op. Do they know what that first value use case is going to be? Do they have identified who the roles are that are going to run with that? Because those forcing functions can help create the right behaviors. And if they don't, then they know they need to get that before they can close an op. And so things like that help train and instill the behaviors we're all looking for. So I would say looking at those leading indicators and what those thresholds are, because you can tell those pretty early in a customer life cycle.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. I think that's great. I think it's honestly it's one of the hardest things that I've navigated as a customer success leader is the share of kind of qualitative and quantitative KPIs and for a CSM, and also how do you sort of measure for things that are not in their control, both positive and negative. And so a couple ways that we've gone about this in terms of actual comp structure at AirCall for our CSMs is we try to look at, to Dan's point, both the leading and the lagging indicators. And guess what? At the end of the day, what the board cares about is NRR and your total growth as a business. And so you need to care about the lagging indicators. You can't lose sight of those, and you need to comp on those accordingly. But there's a way to sort of differentiate a comp plan to include consideration for other aspects. And so we are kind of we separate our comp to not just be an NRR number. We separate expansion, contraction, and churn. And that does empower a CSM if they have a quarter where they had one big churn, that they don't give up, that they still, I know that they can exceed their expansion number and even have an accelerator on expansion, and they go after selling expansion, even though their total NRR might be net negative. And so that's one way in which we differentiate kind of KPIs and tie that to comp. And then another is looking at activity metrics and understanding what are our most successful customers, what do they look like, walking backwards from there. How many touch points do those customers have with us? Not just an arbitrary health score, but actually looking at an engagement score. Are they speaking? Are they making support tickets? Are they having recurring meetings with their customer success manager? Are there certain activities within the product that we know make them successful? And incorporating that into the overall kind of health metric of a CSM to really empower them and make sure that they feel that they're in control of their business and they know what the right steps are, and they are incentivized to take the right steps for things that we know and have strong data to show will show up in the lagging indicator of that net retention number. And then the other thing we do is we actually do comp our sales teams on a ramp retention number as well. And so our AEs are incentivized for the first 3 months of a customer journey. We're looking at actually making this even longer because we see great value there. So if a customer churns within the first 3 months, that's a clawback. That has a negative impact on their quota. But also if they expand and they're closing business that is likely to expand, they get that expansion number towards their quota. And so that does create, again, back to those shared KPIs, that overlap of that shared responsibility to be successful and create that long-term value for your customers.
So the thing I always think about is what we measure gets done, in a sense, right? So when we think about comp and incentives and that, if we as leaders don't build the right comp structure up front, right, our teams are going to do whatever we put in front of them as their goal package, right? So when I think about some of that, how do we make sure that as leaders we're thinking of these things, right? It's that time of year, planning season's around, it's happening. What should we be doing as leaders to assure that we have those shared KPIs? Madeline, to your point, right? I think that if we build that internal one team, Dan, as you were talking about as well, like we create that idea and we have these shared metrics. What do we need to do to make that happen? What should we be going back to our teams and talking about?
Well, I think it's important that as a leader, whatever level of leadership you're at, so if you're a VP, if you're a director, if you're a manager, if you're a team lead across the board, that you take it upon yourself and you hold your leaders accountable to have an understanding of what the actual business outcomes that we desire to happen are, right? And so how is the business? What does the board care about? If you're a publicly traded company, what are you reporting on publicly? What is important in terms of your indicators for success as an organization? And empowering yourself to understand that has to be step number one. And then from there, and that's what's the beauty of kind of the structure of OKRs and KPIs, is you break it down to the more granular level to empower your individuals. And so you have to really make sure, for us, we're building new products next year, which is really exciting. We're gonna build a lot of functionality that our customers are gonna want to buy, and they're gonna see some tool consolidation opportunities within our tech stack. And so we know that that's one of our big bets we're placing and one of our guiding principles. And how do we then think about moving the needle on those investments as AEs, as CSMs, as product leaders who are going to be building the new functionality, et cetera. And establishing that from the very top down is so critical to then empower in the day-to-day. And if you are a leader, spend a lot of time making sure you yourself understand not just your goals, but the cross-functional goals and the overarching goals of the business, and then educating and being very transparent to the best of your ability with your team. That's kind of step number one. From there, in terms of kind of comp planning and the more granular question, Justin, in terms of planning, which I'm deep in right now, by the way, I think giving yourself a little bit of opportunity to know what the concrete kind of guiding principles are, but also perhaps have a level of flexibility as the business evolves. Business is evolving quite a bit right now. The landscape is changing across the world, the competitive, AI, there's so much happening. And so for us, we try to keep a little component of our team kind of incentive structure as somewhat flexible on a quarterly basis. So if we know that we're releasing a new feature in Q2 of next year and we want to drive adoption, perhaps that little piece of the comp or the KPI, whether it's tied to compensation or it's more of just one of their overarching goals, is available for us to slot into a focus in that quarter, because we're going to need that lever when the time comes, in addition to kind of the concrete, more lagging indicators. So building that flexibility and also really understanding what the overarching principles are is how I would go about approaching it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think Madeline hit the nail on the head right there. Just that idea of it needs to start with what the goal is that you're trying to actually achieve for the next year, and then do your metrics actually empower that. I think having an honest conversation about that first and foremost is what enables the rest of what Madeline described. Because if you realize that your typical KPIs that you would normally do actually will disincentivize the behavior you want that's needed to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish that following year, then you need to have an honest conversation about that. And once you've done that and you've ensured that you're aligning the KPIs accordingly, then you can do the rest of all the amazing things that Madeline just walked through that I honestly couldn't have said any better.
Awesome. So we've talked about a couple of things. We've talked about trust, active listening, empowering our reps, making sure we're able to tell stories, understanding verticals. We just had a deep dive into KPIs and some numbers. I think, with a couple minutes that are remaining, we love it. I'm bought in, right? I'm sitting in the audience. I'm going, yes, this is exactly what I want to be doing with my group. I'm feeling that energy. What is the enablement plan that we need to be putting in front of our teams to go from this transactional, behavior that we've been ingrained in them? Follow your playbook. This is your talk track, right? Do it this way, and getting them into that consultative mode. What's the enablement strategy to kind of round us out and close us out? What do we need to go back and think about if we wanted to go and operationalize some of this and really go and enable the field? What should we be thinking about?
I'll jump in first here. I think it starts with, before you can get into the strategy and playbook enablement, it starts with a lot of mindset enablement first around for the teams being able to buy into that. I think it's secondly, in a very strong correlation there to the mindset coaching for the team, is helping the teams understand why this is to their benefit, the what's in it for me. We talk about that for customers, but help your team members understand why this shift is actually setting them and therefore the company up for long-term success. Because if you don't do all of that first, and just going straight to new playbooks, there will be resistance. The people who are great at the old playbooks will have a reluctance to want to embrace something new, because why would they if they don't see that there's something in it for them to make that change? So I think helping get that buy-in at a cultural mindset level is it's foundational. You can't skip that in the enablement process and go straight to new playbooks and new processes. From there, operationalizing, I would say, looks a lot more around the way you are reframing your training and your KPIs. And so from the training perspective, rather than just training on the product and features and things like that, training on the customer businesses. What are the core businesses you sell into? Do you have people that are already from that industry? Great. If not, how can you empower your teams with knowledge around those core industries to better understand what the customers are going through? How can you better empower them to achieve the new KPIs that you are now giving them? What new skills will they need that they did not need to achieve their old KPIs? Because you likely don't have a one-to-one match for a new environment that you're moving into. Meanwhile, keeping that just the honest perspective as a leader that change is hard for your people as you're going through enablement and having that level of understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, really well said, Dan. And I echo with kind of each of your points. I would just add a couple things. I think one, establish a baseline. And so as a leader, or if you are lucky enough to have an enablement team, empower your kind of front level leaders as well, and actually your team to do some call listenings. So whether you use a tool like AirCall, shameless plug, or a Gong type tool, listen to calls and really take some time to understand what the baseline is. How are we talking to our customers? What kind of questions are we asking? Whether it's a net new sale, or maybe if a customer is asking, I want this button to be red from a feature request standpoint, how do you reframe that and say, well, why? How does that have an impact on your desired outcomes as a business leader, right? So get a baseline. What's happening today? From there, sort of understand where you want to get to, and then bridge that gap by creating an action plan accordingly to kind of get to that new state. And so try to make it as concrete and as realistic as possible. We want to shift from going right to the solution because we're actually seeing win rates aren't where we want them to be, to actually being taking a little bit of time to be much more consultative and asking some deeper questions that's going to get us to a much more deeper understanding of the customer and hopefully increase win rates. So create that desired outcome from your baseline. And then the other thing I'll say is really invest in training your frontline managers. So make sure that those who are managing the reps in the field have a deep understanding of, to Dan's point, the why, but also that they are you test them and you role play with them, and you can see that they are understanding of the difference and they're empowered themselves to then believe and hold the team accountable and have the skills themselves. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think I think you make a great point too, is, one of the things that I've always talked about with my teams is that, like, when we're rolling out change management, it's hard, right? So like when we're rolling out new software or new product, to drive adoption of using the new product, we need to be able to coach to and through the tool. So like use the tool to coach through it. When I think about changing a behavior, it takes us back to the old style of like coaching that none of us were probably very comfortable with, which is role plays and, sitting down and doing like ride-alongs and listening for what's good and reinforcing the positive behaviors that we're hearing of, wow, did you hear how when you asked that question, they told you more than you needed to know? You now know more about their business. How are we going to use that? When you start to have those types of conversations with your people, that coaching is very enriching, right? It really drives that positive behavior. So I think it's just important to reinforce that, as leaders, we also have to go through a change management process when we think about changing the way that we engage with customers and the processes we're going to use, or if we're going to change the way that we want our teams to approach a conversation. We need to lead by example, and we need to be able to role play and go back to being uncomfortable with some of those things that we used to have to do all the time earlier in our careers, probably. So with that, I do want to take, we have a couple more minutes here. I just wanted to close out with, Dan, is there anything that you want to share with the audience as it relates to, we didn't cover? Again, we talked a lot about trust. We talked about empowering our teams. We just talked about how do we enable them, utilizing shared KPIs. If you had to give anybody one last kind of glimpse into Dan's brain, what's that one thing you want to share about transitioning from this transactional selling motion to more of that consultative motion? What would you think that would be?
The last thing I would add here is just on the really practical partnership level between the sales and customer success teams that are working together with these customers from a consultative perspective. And that would be that partnership and that journey that you want your customers to go through to grow organically with your business will not happen by accident. You will need to think through intentionally, how do you create an environment that fosters the partnership between these teams? How can you create the structure as a leader? It's easy to think, great, we set the KPIs, the teams are just going to naturally do what we know they need to do. The reality sets in, they won't, because it's just everybody's busy with their own role. Nobody has any malice in it. It's just the roles are set up to do what they're focused on doing. So spend that time intentionally thinking through and designing, how will we create this partnership? How will we create the level of a working relationship that's needed to accomplish the goals we're trying to set out for here? And then you almost can't overthink that, because it's requires a lot of time and effort to get to, and you can't shortcut it. So that bring people together, bring the leaders together, and then begin rolling that on down to the teams. But it would be to really think through the nuts and bolts of how will we get these people to actually partner together the way we know they need to, because it won't happen naturally.
Yeah. Madeline, words of wisdom.
I would just add, I think taking time to educate on the change cross-functionally is important, right? So if you're seeing that the transactional selling is not scaling at the way that it used to, or that you're running into some roadblocks, really bringing that feedback to the broader business. So perhaps it's more of how the product team is thinking about delivering in a PLG way, or perhaps it is how your solutions engineers are spending time doing deeper discovery from a technical perspective that is, a little bit more consultative versus just checking boxes from a feature standpoint, or perhaps it's thinking about partnering with your finance team on the impact on time to close, right? To your earlier point, Justin. So I think spending time really building that cross-functional understanding and getting everyone on board and doing internal education, I think, is really key. And then, I like that you brought up kind of role-playing and that old way of selling. I think with the rise of AI and with more and more being automated, we're going to need more of that human connection and more of that. I like to do improv classes with my team. Think on your feet, right? So people still have that ability to strategically think and really, use their best judgment. So I would just lean into the human, even though we're looking at ways to scale across our business and make sure that you partner cross-functionally on the initiative.
Yeah, great insights from both of you today. Recommend everybody that's on this call, make sure to follow both of them. They are thought leaders in this space, and they have a wealth of knowledge. And I appreciate you guys sharing all of that today with us. And, I would just add to Madeline's point, with the rise of technology and the tools that are out there, at the end of the day, it's still powered by people. And we have to continue to invest in our people through coaching and enablement, and making sure that they have the ability to leverage those tools to do their jobs differently, more efficiently, and be more effective. So even though there's tools on the horizon, we're still powered by people at the end of the day. So again, I want to thank everybody for their time today. I think this was very informational. I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation online with anybody that wants to hit me up on LinkedIn. Again, I recommend following Madeline, following Dan. Very, very educational or very insightful within their spaces. So thank you all for your time today.
Thank you so much.